Just a few years ago, nobody, and I mean nobody, was looking at Paddy Pimblett as a legit top 5 threat, let alone a guy who could ever fight for UFC gold. The wild weight cuts, the questionable diet between camps, the goofy haircut, the antics, the lack of seriousness, and of course, the controversial win over Jared Gordon. All of it pushed fans away from believing that he is championship material. For most people, Paddy wasn't even a gatekeeper. He was a fun mid-carder at best, a journeyman with charisma. But those days, they're long gone, because now the baddie is gearing up to fight Justin Gaethje for the interim UFC lightweight title as the betting favorite. And suddenly, the idea of Paddy Pimblett becoming a UFC champion doesn't sound crazy anymore. It sounds possible, maybe even likely. When Paddy entered the UFC back in September 2021, it felt like a blast of fresh air hitting the organization. Wild, chaotic fighting style, fun on the mic, upbeat personality. He was the kind of guy fans could get behind instantly. And he came in as a former Cage Warriors champion, just like Conor McGregor and Michael Bisping before him. And in his debut, he delivered exactly what fans hoped for. A first-round knockout over Luigi Vendramini right after getting rocked himself and nearly finished. When reporters asked him about it afterward, his reaction was priceless. So right away, we had a trash talker who could entertain and actually back up the talk. And it didn't stop there. The baddie kept the momentum rolling the following year by submitting Rodrigo Vargas and Jordan Levitt, racking up 3 straight Performance of the Night bonuses. Oh, and let's not forget the infamous moment where he twerked in Levitt's face right after beating him, just days after Levitt promised he'd do the same. But then, things took a turn for the worse. In what would be his 3rd fight in 2022, Paddy was matched with Jared Gordon, an average blue-collar fighter most casual fans barely knew. That's why everyone expected the Liverpudlian to steamroll him with ease, but reality didn't match the script. Gordon turned out to be a tough puzzle to solve and pushed Paddy harder than almost anyone had before. Many fans felt Gordon clearly won most of the rounds. And then came the worst part. The judges gave Paddy the win, a decision that instantly turned the crowd against him. But what really made fans flip wasn't just the controversial decision. It was Paddy acting like he had dominated the fight, which was far from the truth. Some people argued the fight was close, sure, but almost nobody believed he actually won it. To make things even worse, he blamed his lackluster performance on an injury, something many fans saw as just another excuse. And just like that, the hype train went off the tracks. The question everyone started asking was, if he struggled this much with Jared Gordon, how is he supposed to compete with killers like Charles Oliveira or Islam Makhachev, who were ruling lightweight at the time? To be fair, Paddy did undergo surgery right after the fight, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Almost no one saw him as a top 3 guy anymore. But the collapse of the hype train didn't end there. The next year, he was matched with Tony Ferguson, legendary but old and way past his prime. A win over this version of Tony wasn't going to mean much, but at least it could have shown that Paddy was back and that his previous performance was just a bad night. But here's the thing. When the UFC feeds an aging star to a rising prospect, the young fighter needs an emphatic finish. You've got to make noise. You've got to make fans talk. And what did Paddy do? He dragged an older, battle-worn Tony Ferguson to a unanimous decision. No big finish, no highlight, nothing spectacular. A win is a win, right? Well, not really. The criticism only got louder. Fans argued that barely scraping by Jared Gordon and failing to finish a declining Tony Ferguson proved Paddy wasn't championship material. And it didn't help that his antics outside the cage and his lack of seriousness kept adding fuel to the fire. But the biggest issue? His lack of discipline with his diet. The man fought at 155 pounds and ballooned up to 205 pounds outside of camp. He loved food, and he didn't hide it. That might be fine anywhere else, but in MMA, where every detail matters, especially if you want to be a world champion, that kind of weight fluctuation is a huge red flag. But eventually, Paddy the baddie said enough is enough, and he finally decided to prove he could change for the better. Lately, have you seen Paddy Pimblett looking fat or out of shape even when he's not in camp? Yeah, me neither. It really looks like the Englishman has reinvented himself. He finally took the advice everyone gave him about his diet. If you want to be a world champion, you've got to lay off the bacon and chocolate, or at least cut it way down. Sure, Paddy still walks around above the 155-pound limit when he's not fighting, but nowhere near the numbers he used to hit. Gone are the days of him blowing up to 205 pounds and looking like a light heavyweight between camps. And with the new discipline came the return of his finishing instinct. The first man on his comeback hit list was Bobby Green on July 27, 2024. The Liverpudlian cinched up a tight triangle choke in the first round and put Green to sleep early that night. Now, Bobby Green isn't exactly a win you brag to your grandkids about, but he's been a top 15 regular for years. Putting him away was a solid first step in a brand new chapter. Then in 2025 came another name every fan knows, Michael Chandler. A pure brawler with violent intentions, a berserker style, a ridiculous toughness. None of that mattered. Paddy put on a clean, composed performance and finished Chandler in the third round. Poor Arman Tsarukyan. He really thought he was next, but it looks like Dana White is still annoyed that Arman threw away his chance to fight for the belt when he was originally matched with Makhachev. We can debate all day whether Paddy deserves a title shot, but one thing is obvious. He looks focused, he looks serious, he looks disciplined, and he looks better than ever. Maybe the title shot wasn't fully earned, but who cares? It's an interim belt. The UFC was going to make this fight anyway. Dana and Hunter Campbell know exactly what they're doing. Stylistic, Paddy is a tricky matchup for Gaethje, and if Paddy wins the interim strap, the next step is huge, a showdown with the undisputed champion, Ilia Topuria. And that fight would be massive for two reasons. First, the UFC has been starving for elite trash talkers. The Shale and Conor eras are over, and nobody since then has brought that same energy. Paddy might be the new generation's trash talk king, and a rivalry with Ilia, a guy he already hates, is pure gasoline. They've clashed multiple times already. Second, it's a fascinating matchup. Ilia has the power, but Paddy is the much bigger man, and size matters in martial arts. We've seen Ilia handle bigger opponents before, guys like Jai Herbert or Charles Oliveira, but fighting someone like Paddy, a tough scouser who doesn't get knocked out, that's a different test. So honestly, it feels like the plan all along was to give Paddy a favorable matchup in Gaethje, let him grab the interim belt, and then set up a monster super fight for the undisputed title. Imagine if Ilia comes back next year and fights Paddy on the UFC White House card. That would be enormous. Paddy would go from barely scraping past Jared Gordon and Tony Ferguson to headlining one of the biggest cards in UFC history in front of the entire world at the White House. Now, let's not overlook Justin Gaethje here. The guy basically has a PhD in violence. According to the early odds, the baddie opens as a -230 favorite, while the former interim champ Gaethje comes in as a +176 underdog. But honestly, those numbers might not mean much once the cage door closes. If Justin's ballistic missiles start landing, it could be GG well played, good night Paddy. But stylistically, the Englishman is the more complete fighter. He can strike, he can grapple, and he can absolutely submit Gaethje if the fight hits the mat. Now, Gaethje is a solid wrestler, but he only uses it defensively. And on the ground, his jiu-jitsu might be the weakest in the entire division. That's exactly where Paddy's biggest advantage lies. Whenever Gaethje gets taken down, he treats the canvas like it's lava, panicking, scrambling, exposing his back just to stand up. If Pimblett capitalizes on that moment and takes the back, the fight could be over right there. And just like that, we could have a new interim lightweight champion, Paddy Pimblett. A guy nobody ever took seriously, a guy who struggled against mid-level opponents, suddenly sitting at the very top of the UFC food chain. It wouldn't be the first time fans lost respect for someone, only to turn around and embrace them again. It happened with Michael Bisping. People loved to hate Bisping. He was the loudmouth, the journeyman, the guy nobody thought would ever touch UFC gold. But once he started knocking out top contenders and shocked the world by becoming champion, he turned into one of the most beloved fighters on the roster. And funny enough, he's also English and also a former Cage Warriors champion. So the question becomes, can Paddy Pimblett follow that same path to glory? Only time will tell. But first he needs to deliver a memorable performance in January, which would catapult him straight to a mega fight against Ilia Topuria. If you enjoyed the video, front kick that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join the Dialed In MMA Club today.